Well, good afternoon and welcome to this evening's planning committee meeting. Strange times, we're obviously doing this remotely for the first time, so I will say bear with us, we're all new to this, we're all going to try and get through it together. If there are any issues, we can pause and we'll make sure we catch up on that. Just like they're on silent, as it's on cue. That was a perfect reminder to remind everyone about that.
Hi.
Good afternoon
Welcome
and welcome
to the new
to
Bixby.
this evening's planning committee meeting. I can hear feedback from
Strange times, we're obviously doing this remotely for the first time.
So that's great.
Say bear with us, we're all new to this, we're all going to try and get through it together.
Right, there we go, fantastic. Just to explain, obviously I'm in room 10 tonight, as you can see from the decoration behind me. That is because the internet has gone off at my house, so I've had to come into the town hall to use the Wi-Fi. The town hall is still closed. This is not normal, it's just to get us through this meeting. And like I say, we'll go through it, bear with us, we'll get there. So it brings us on to the first item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. And we've had apologies from Councillor Lisa Preston. And then item 2 is the minutes of the last meeting. Can we agree those minutes that we've all had to be a true record?
Aye.
Agreed.
There we go, thank you.
Agreed.
Item 3 is declaration of interest from members. Because of the way we're doing this, we've asked that question before the meeting. So everybody is assumed to have no declaration of interest unless you want to raise one now. No, that's fantastic. So we'll just do a bit of housekeeping before we start the next part of the agenda. So we would usually introduce all the members at the start of the meeting. We can't do that because it's different logistically. So when a member speaks, they will introduce themselves of who they are and which ward they represent. They will then make whatever presentation they're going to make, and at the end they will let us know that they've finished presenting. And on that, I will pass over to Melanie, the planning officer, to introduce the etiquette around speaking before we move to item 4.
Good evening, everybody. Just to assist those members of the public who want to address the committee, we'd just like to point out the following. A total of 5 minutes is allocated for those speaking in favour or against the application this evening. Comments should be restricted to material issues, and there's no opportunity for dialogue between the committee and members of the public, and nor will the public be able to ask questions of the officers or the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. So that takes us to item 4 on the agenda, which is planning application P/2020/0136/ADC, which is Unit 2, Moore Parkway, Haydock. That's page 11 in your agenda, whether you're viewing it on hard copy or electronically. And on that, I will pass back to Melanie to introduce the application, and you should see the presentation on screen.
Thank you, Chair. I think if we've just got a couple of slides like we normally have to show you. Firstly is the aerial photograph of the site, and as you can see, it relates to a large logistics building adjacent to the East Lancs Road and Haydock Industrial Estate. It's the building that's nearer to the East Lancashire Road. As you can also see, there's residential development on the opposite side of the East Lancs. And the application before you this evening is to display a non-illuminated sign just below the eaves of the building, as per the location indicated on the photo and in your agenda. And the sign is around about 10 metres wide and 4 metres high. Can I have the next slide, please? And you have these plans in your agenda, but it's just a useful indication in terms of the location of where the sign is, just beneath the eaves of the building, and the scale within the context of the elevation. So we received 9 objections as a result of the publicity carried out, and the comments, as usual, are set out in section 4 of the report, but they include concerns about illumination from existing lighting, that the sign is out of scale and is overbearing, and it isn't necessary. And so consideration of applications for advert consent is limited to 2 factors: amenity and public safety. And we can take account of the development plan, but only insofar as it relates to those 2 factors. In terms of safety, the Highways Advisor has been consulted, and I want to amend the comment in paragraph 7.6. It is a non-illuminated sign, and so it wouldn't be a distraction to drivers. It's also a significant distance from the A580, and the sign wouldn't be materially different to others in that location. For amenity, The sign will be viewed within the context of an extensive elevation and wouldn't be a dominant feature. As this is the only sign on that building, it wouldn't result in clutter. The sign will of course be seen by occupants of housing in the vicinity, but given it's some distance away, it wouldn't harm amenity, and particularly as it isn't specifically illuminated. The existing lighting located on the building does mean that the sign would be visible at night, but there'd be no additional harm as a result. So in our view, the sign would not cause harm to the matters of acknowledged importance and complies with the development plan also. So we're recommending that advertisement consent be granted, subject to the conditions that are stated in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just wait for the cam to come back to me. I think it's going to. Right, so just to explain, there's a bit of feedback going on in the background. So I'm just going to try and resolve that. I think the only microphone that isn't muted is Mr. Parkinson. So I'm just going to ask to make sure. I know you're probably going to have to listen to this meeting somewhere else. I think the feedback is coming through that phone. So obviously we've had the presentation from officers. And then let me just check to see who's not on mute. Right, so everybody is, other than me, who's in a quiet room on my own. I think it's Mr. Parkinson. You just need to make sure there's nothing going on in the background, just so we can make sure we hear what you're saying. Right, so we'll move to those speaking on the issue. We have one person registered to speak against, that's Mr. Parkinson. You'll have 5 minutes. I would ask you to stick to material issues. I think once Mr. Parkinson starts talking, the lag from the feedback will probably stop. So what I'll do is I'll pass over to Mr. Parkinson. Can you hear me, Mr. Parkinson? Right, so when you're ready, Mr. Parkinson, you've got 5 minutes and you can start. I'm assuming you can hear me because your mic's now on mute. So just make sure you take it off mute and then you can start. I'm just going to ask again if you're there, Mr. Parkinson. Then you need to take your mic off mute whilst you're speaking. We were always going to have a moment of a technical issue like this, so just bear with it for a moment while we try and get things sorted. So, Mr. Parkinson, I don't know if you can hear me, but your microphone is on mute. So if you take it off, you should be able to do your presentation. Right, we're just going to give it a few more minutes. In case this happened, what we've done is asked anyone who was speaking in either for or against to give us a copy of their speech, because it's important that whatever they were going to say gets heard anyway. It might just be a different way of doing it, and we fear that this might happen. So bear with me. We'll give it a few more seconds. I'd rather Mr. Parkinson made his own presentation because that's his right to do it. If that doesn't happen, then we will pass to officers to read out the pre-prepared statement that Mr. Parkinson has sent to them, and we can reference the picture on the screen that has been sent to us from Mr. Parkinson. So it doesn't look like we're having any resolution to the issue of not being able to hear Mr. Parkinson. So I would ask officers if they want to start that speech and put the picture on screen for everyone to see. We can probably progress the meeting that way.
Hi, so it's Daly Parsonage is the planning officer that dealt with that application, and I've got Mr. Parkinson's speech here, if that's okay. So I take it everyone can hear me.
Yeah, when you're ready,
Yeah.
Mr. Parsonage, you can start.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Parkinson, and I'm the chairman of Group Residents Against the Florida Farm Development. Could I ask you to turn to page 17 of the agenda? This is the drawing that accompanied the original application that was lodged with the council. It depicts a cartoon monkey some 4 metres or 13 feet high and 16 metres 52 feet from ground level. The houses on the opposite side of the East Lancashire Road to the Kellogg's warehouses are large family homes some 200 metres from the development. I have asked for a photo to be displayed showing exactly how overbearing the development is. The red outline indicates where the cartoon would have been. The residents of several hundred houses can quite clearly see the gable on which this sign was to have been erected. For many residents, this would have been the first thing they saw in the morning when opening their curtains and the last thing they saw when closing the curtains in the evening. It is hardly surprising that the public were furious at the original proposals, but we have to thank Kellogg's for reacting and changing the application to the Kellogg's logo that's the subject of today's application. This change in the application is the only time during the 4 long-year saga of the development of Greenbelt at Florida Farm that anybody has listened to the concerns of residents and other objectors and reacted with a positive response. Of course, we would be far happier if there was no need for the application to be made today and the Florida Farm development hadn't been granted planning permission. Despite the amended application, I am still objecting to the application as there is no need for a logo of this size to be placed on the building at that height. The development is well signposted off the East Lancashire Road with a left turn in when travelling from Liverpool and a right turn when travelling from Manchester. Signage at the new roundabout should be adequate to direct vehicles to the correct location. This sign is purely for advertising purposes and is not required for the efficient operation of the warehouse. The residents continue to suffer the effects of these monstrous warehouses, which shouldn't have been built in a beautiful area of our Greenbelt. The noise, pollution, and continued traffic impact is horrendous. These warehouses will never attain the job figures promoted by this council. Automation is the direction that warehouse development has been travelling for some years, certainly before the original application for Florida Farm North was submitted. This is something that should be borne in mind by the planning committee when considering future similar applications. We've seen an announcement that in the last couple of days, Amazon have donated £1,000 gift card to Teardrops Homeless Charity. This is a very worthwhile charity and we thank Amazon for that donation. However, on the basis that charity begins at home, perhaps both Amazon and Kellogg's would consider donating to charities and local societies and clubs based in Haydock. When the original application was granted, the council didn't consider it necessary to secure payment from the developer for any improvements to infrastructure or anything else within Haydock or Blackbrook wards. The only contribution was £500,000 towards the work at the A580-A58 junction. I wonder if the council has asked the developer to pay that contribution now that the highway works have commenced. Thank you.
Thank you for that. What we'll do now, as usual, I will pass over to Melanie to pull up any points that the officers would like to make before we move on the agenda. So I'll pass over to Melanie.
Just a couple of points, Chair. Mr. Parkin said he was objecting because there's no need for the logo because it's just an advertisement, but the advertisement regulations and the government recognise that businesses do want to advertise themselves. The question here is whether it would cause harm or not, and that's the question you've got to ask yourselves this evening. And as you can see from the report, it's our view that it doesn't. And whilst it's unrelated, I would say that we did secure infrastructure improvements, and to the development, Mr. Parkinson referred to it himself. We did secure a £500,000 contribution to the junction improvements, and that sum of money has been paid to the council. Thanks.
Thank you. So obviously, in line with the usual agenda, we have nobody registered from the applicant to speak on the application. So at this point, we will move to the committee debate, which obviously is going to take a bit of a different format than usual. So what I would ask is, anybody who wishes to speak on the application, they can indicate through this app to show that they would like to. So I would open that debate up at the moment. We'll just wait a few seconds to see if anybody wants to indicate that they'd like to speak. We have no indications at the moment, so to fill the awkward silence, I might as well do the part that I was going to speak about. So I think Mr. Parkinson summed up some of the points in his objection, and I was looking at some of the other objections that were made, which go the other way in saying that because it isn't big enough to read from the road, that it should be bigger and not the size that it is. So I just think we need to be careful that some of those objections seem to contradict each other. I think we need to accept that the discussion tonight is not a rehash of the application to build the warehouses. That has been done and approved by the committee. The warehouses are there. So it is irrelevant on that. We need to identify the fact that the previous signage application that came before the council, on which the committee attached conditions, was appealed and overturned by the Government Planning Inspectorate to remove those conditions because they contradicted the advice and the scientific information that we've been given. We just need to bear that in mind because that has a cost to the council, and so we shouldn't be attaching unfair or unreasonable conditions that then impacts the public purse. As public servants, we have that responsibility to protect. Mr. Parkinson referenced the fact that it wasn't needed and it shouldn't be because it was advertisement. But the whole point of the application is that it is an advertisement display consent, which is different to a normal planning permission. But pretty much the clue is in the name. The other thing that I thought was interesting is all units of this size. So we use a Tesco, for example. They are big warehouse type structures with a massive wording of Tesco on the front. Or similar to Amazon and Kellogg's, you've obviously got what was rolling stock that is now Costco, that has got massive letters and words emblazoned across the front of it. And I think we have to accept that they do that to show people who are going there where it is. So whether it's needed or not is their choice to decide. And the fact that they're advertising where it is, the contradiction would be that they didn't say where they were, and trucks would drive around the streets or go off the piste and then try and find in residential areas. So I think based on that, we need to accept that the warehouses are up. It's a person's prerogative if they do or don't like them, but this isn't that debate tonight. And so I'm not going to make any recommendation at the moment because I don't want to stifle the debate. And Councillor McDonnell has indicated he would like to speak. So I will end my speech there and pass over to Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Dennis McDonnell, speaking from Billinge. The planning proposal is for an advertisement sign for the Kellogg's brand. Advertisements are normally directed at a particular audience or group of potential product users. In this case, it is claimed that motorists on the East Lancs Road will not be able to see the sign. So for whom is the sign intended? Which particular group or audience? It appears to me that it is not a real advertisement sign, but a vanity sign for the organisation, displaying the name of the organisation by the entrance gate that drivers and visitors can see should be sufficient. In today's economy, it is essential to have large warehouses or industrial units. Every effort is made to blend them into the landscape with pale colours, trees and hedging, yet this proposal goes against that standard, as this sign by its very nature, colour and position is intended to be intrusive in the landscape. I therefore do not support this planning application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McDonnell. I would check whether anybody else has indicated that they'd like to speak. I'm not seeing anybody at the moment. Councillor Bowden,
can I come in on that one?
1 minute, Councillor Jones, just because Councillor Bowden indicated first. So Councillor Bowden, then Councillor Jones.
Very quickly, Chair, as nobody else has indicated to speak, I'd like to move the recommendation.
Right, so just bear with me one moment because the live screen never went off me. So what I'm going to do, obviously Councillor Jones and you were in tie, so I'll let Councillor Jones speak because he had indicated, and then we have a recommendation to approve the application. If anybody wants to indicate through the chat that they'd like to second that application, that motion while Councillor Jones is speaking, then that's fine. But Councillor Jones, can I just ask you, right, your camera's on, wait till it goes red, and then obviously you're entitled to your presentation.
You're right. Thank you. Alan Jones, Councillor for Rainford. Just listening to Councillor McDonnell, I think he raises some good points. This, though, is a very, very difficult situation. We turned down an application on Amazon at the side of it, and we've been told that on appeal it was carried. We've got to be careful here whether it is carried or whether it is appealed and then carried. We've gone a long way with built on green belt land. You know my opinion on that. I've been saying it for a long time. Here we have a sign that is going on to identify what it is and who it is. Councillor McDonnell makes some very good points here, and I think I would support what he is saying. So I too am not happy about the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Melanie, one of the planning officers, has just indicated that she wants to clarify the Amazon sign position. So I'm going to pass over to Melanie and then we can move to the motion that's been proposed.
Just to clarify on something Councillor Jones said, the council didn't turn down the signs on Amazon. The council actually approved the signage on the Amazon unit. What we did was add some conditions around the use of illumination, so we time limited the illumination. So the appeal was on that basis. I just wanted to clarify that with you. So I think the something you've got to bear in mind this evening is that the council itself approved a number of illuminated signs of a similar scale to this. This is one sign that is not illuminated on the facade. I just want you to bear that in mind. Thanks, Chair.
Yes, I accept to what Melanie has said.
Thank you. It's going to be to accept because it's factual, so that's fantastic. Alan, if you could turn your camera off, please, and then we can move on to the next part. So I'll just wait for my screen to come back live. So Councillor Macaulay has indicated that he'd like to speak. So if you want to indicate whether that's to second the motion or speak, then let me know that first.
Hi, Richard Macaulay, Thatcher Heath Ward Councillor. I'll speak first, and then, depending on my answer, I'll be making a second counter-Bowden proposal.
Perfect. Go on.
A question to Melanie, really. Obviously, the previous application that's just been mentioned is in our papers further down the agenda. Can you give an indication how much that cost us as a council to defend that case?
Yes, through you, Chair. We didn't have an award of costs against us, so the applicant didn't apply for costs against the council for unreasonable behaviour, but it did obviously cost officer time to deal with the application, and it probably took around 8 or 9 hours, including planning officer, a senior officer, and probably tech support. So we're talking in the region of like £450–500 ish to have dealt with that.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, and these things are always difficult, aren't they? And you know, when we're faced against these things, we may not particularly like it per se, but on planning terms, I can't see a reason to turn it down, really. Although I am sympathetic with what the objectors were saying. So on that basis, I'd like to support Councillor Bowden's motion. I'll second that. I'll formally second that.
Thank you, Councillor Macaulay. So we have a motion from Councillor Bowden, who has moved approval as recommended in the papers. Councillor Macaulay has seconded that motion, so we'll go to a vote. Now, just to explain for everybody in the room and the enthralled public that are watching at home, we would usually do this in the room by a show of hands, which is almost impossible. So I will go through everybody's name on the agenda in the order that they appear on the agenda, that the camera will then go to you as that councillor. When the screen goes red around the outside, that is when you're live, and you need to make sure that you only speak when that comes on. So if you want to tee up and get ready with your camera and your mute button off, then we'll start with Councillor Banks, please.
Okay, Councillor Dave Banks, Earlstown Ward. I'm voting for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Bowden.
Councillor Bowden, voting for the motion.
Right, can I just remind everybody to wait until your screen goes red? Councillor Burns.
Councillor Burns, voting for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Fulham.
Councillor Fulham, John Fulham, voting for the motion.
Thank you. Then I'm next, Councillor Gomez-Aspron. I'll wait for the icon to come back to me. Lovely. So Councillor Gomez-Aspron, and I vote in favour of approving the motion. So next is Councillor Grunwald.
Yes, I support the motion. Hi, I'm Barry Grunwald, a councillor in Rainhill Ward. Hope.
Thank you. So Councillor Hattersley. Just 1 minute, Councillor Hattersley, microphone off mute.
Robin Hattersley, councillor for Thatto Heath Ward, voting for the motion.
Thank you. So Councillor Maloney.
Councillor Maloney supporting the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Macaulay.
I can't see the red thing. Is it me? For the motion, Chair, if you can hear me.
Right, we'll just wait for a moment to see where the red square has gone, because I can't see it at the minute either. I think it's picked that up anyway. So Councillor McDonnell.
Councillor McDonnell, Billinge and Stanley Green voting against the motion.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Preston, so before, just to explain, so Councillor Preston sent her apologies, but did join the meeting just after that item on the agenda. So has heard the full debate and discussion. So Councillor Preston, if you just wait till your screen goes live. There you go.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to vote for it because I did miss a bit of it with IT problems. So your advice, please.
It's entirely up to you. It depends whether, did you miss any of the item on the agenda at item 4 in relation to this application?
No, Chair.
Which part did you miss? Anything before that or after?
Just before 1, 2, 3 I missed, and I
right,
came
so
on.
if you've heard all of item 4, then I would say it's your choice whether you vote. I think if you've heard the entirety of item 4, then you're more than welcome to vote.
Chair, I'm for the motion. Councillor Lisa Preston, bold.
Thank you. So then obviously we go through the rest of the agenda. So Councillor Pearl.
Councillor Jeff Pearl, Eccleston Ward, voting against the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, Councillor Alan Jones, Rainford, voting against the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderberg.
Councillor David Vanderberg, Haydock Ward, voting against.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Neil.
Councillor Jill Neil Windle Ward, voting against the motion.
Thank you. So that concludes the councillors who were entitled to vote, and so the motion is carried and the application is approved. So that concludes item 4. At this point, I would say to the speakers that they're more than welcome to stay or leave. It's up to them, but I think Mr. Parkinson has already left. So that moves us on to item 5 on the agenda, which is current planning appeals. So nobody has flagged up a question prior to the meeting that they'd like to ask. I will open it now, so if anybody wants to indicate on the chat at the side. I'll just give it a few seconds. No, so then we move on to item 6. Now, a few people did indicate they'd like to ask questions on this. So firstly, and this is just the order in which I've noted them down, Councillor Jones and Councillor Fulham both indicated prior to the meeting about the same application. So I'll just pass over to Councillor Jones to ask the question, and then I think we're probably going to get an update after officers have been and done it at the meeting.
Yeah, thanks. It isn't a question, it is just a comment, and so that the committee is aware of the situation. First of all, I want to say I'm disgusted with the decision of the inspector. We threw this out, and or the councillor threw it out, but that is a decision. I just want the committee to be aware that the residents are seeking legal advice on it.
Right. Thank you. Just because that went a bit in a direction that I didn't suspect, I'm going to bring Councillor Fulham in to make sure that his question has been answered. So, Councillor Fulham, you indicated on email before the meeting. Do you have a question that you want to ask tonight?
Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, just wait till your screen goes live. There you go.
Hi, Chair. I just wanted to have a bit more background from officers, and it kind of goes along the lines of earlier queries Councillor Macaulay made in relation to agenda item 4. Just for clarity, though, I hope I'm not speaking out of agenda, because I don't know if we've moved on to a different agenda item. My question is in relation to agenda item 5, page 20, the Red Cat Lane appeal, and the determination by the planning inspector that it should be granted contrary to the decision by the authority. I just wanted a bit more background on that, if officers are in a position to give it to us, and whether there's any whether we can account for any resources used, because I think it's really important for those watching at home or wherever they're watching that they understand that we operate in a really tight framework of decisions that we can take, and our discretion, whilst we have some, is limited, and that where we step outside that discretion, the inspector will intervene and make the decisions over our head, and that comes at a cost both to the local authority and ultimately to the local taxpayer. Now, if I'm just using the example given in item 4, £450 is approximately half of 1 year's council tax for one household. It's quite a lot of money, so I'd be grateful if there's any possibility to provide some background on that. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll just wait for it to come back to me. There we go. So just because we've covered quite a few valid and important issues there, and I think for tonight we'll forgive jumping around on the agenda because I think we're just lucky we're making our way through it at this stage. So I'll pass back to Melanie to update on that. Now, for anyone who's got it on their agenda, it's page 20 and it's 8 Red Cat Lane, Crank. So I'll pass over to Melanie.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? I was having trouble unmuting my microphone before.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right, okay. So this was an application to construct 2 dwellings on the car park to the rear of the Red Cat pub that's in Crank. And we dealt with a number of applications on this site, mainly where access was taken through the pub car park itself, and we'd refused. There'd been 2 or 3. And this application was different because it proposed access from Highfield Drive, which I think are the residents that Councillor Jones was referring to. And Highfield Drive is a residential cul-de-sac. And so this was a delegated decision, to be fair, and we refused it for 3 reasons. One was detrimental impact on character appearance of the area, particularly the dwellings on Highfield Drive, and also the proximity of future residents to the car park of the Red Cat, and potential impact on living conditions. That we were also concerned about the reconfiguration of the Red Cat car park, and that it would potentially result in on-street parking, and there wasn't adequate servicing and manoeuvring space, and also finally that there was slight encroachment into the greenbelt, and the inspector disagreed with us on all counts, which we were very disappointed by, to be honest with you. That the inspector said it would effectively extend an existing cul-de-sac in a similar way, and it wouldn't harm character and appearance. That there was a sufficient buffer between the resulting Red Cat car park and the new dwellings that will protect their future living conditions. And finally, they disagreed that there was suitable provision for parking and servicing, and so planning permission was granted. And I understand that they are on site constructing the development at the moment. In relation to what Councillor Fulham said about costs of fighting appeals, it does, and so we do certainly we do consider very carefully when we're going to refuse planning permission for things, because we do know that there's an implication further down the line. I would say that the advert, the cost of dealing with the conditions on the advertisement consent wasn't a lot of money, because it was a relatively straightforward appeal. This would have taken a lot more time. It was dealt with by a senior officer, so the cost of this was possibly 4 figures. Certainly, I would estimate, just because of the amount of time it took and the person who was dealing with it. Again, we were extremely disappointed, but I think what it points to is the government wanting to get houses out of the ground, quite frankly. That they saw an opportunity, and this was, whilst we didn't refuse it on need, this was an opportunity to grant permission for housing. They didn't agree there was harm, we did, and so they decided to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Can I come back on that one, Chairman?
Just yes, but I think just briefly, because I think we've had a very comprehensive reply. Anything more, we'll probably get an update after the meeting, but I'll pass back to you now.
Yeah, thanks. The point I wanted to add is that there is apparently a dispute on who owns the access land, and that is why the residents are seeking legal advice.
Right, just I think at that point, just because we're not here to referee civil disputes, I think we'll note that point and move on. So,
yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So Councillor Macaulay had indicated, and just again, he couldn't wait, so he indicated again. But I'll pass over to Councillor Macaulay now.
Yeah, I thought you'd forgot, Chair. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's just reminded, Councillor Fulham's point there reminded me, we did ask for, if you remember, Mel, if we could have a further column in that spreadsheet of decisions of costs and how much appeals cost us. And I know there's an asterisk on there which tells you we know if it's a committee decision or an officer decision, but that obviously need highlighting as well. It's just so we can sort of pin down then and we can see what decisions are costing us. Makes us more accountable, I think.
Thank you. So I think just on that, we did make that point in the last meeting, and obviously the world turned upside down in between last meeting and this one. So I think going forward, we can ensure that we get that in there because it's important. So the last person that had indicated on this was Councillor Greenwald had indicated he'd like an update on the restaurant in Raynhill that had been refused. So if I can pass over to you, Melanie, if you've got that available, or if you want to send it out after the meeting.
I'll send it out after the meeting, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I'm just looking for any indications of the alternative, but I think that's all right. So then if we move on to the next item on the agenda, so we've done item 5 and 6, and so item 7 is current enforcement cases on which nobody is indicated, but I'll just wait for the chat on the right to see if anybody'd like to. Right, so yes, so Barry's just indicated that Councillor Greenwald's happy with that. So item 7, has anybody got any questions or comments they'd like to ask on item 7? Just give it 1 second as people frantically flick through to see if they found anything interesting or exciting. Right, so Councillor Fulham indicated that his mod gover's locked out. So what I would suggest is, if there are any questions on item 7, everybody else hasn't indicated there are, but this is the last item on the agenda anyway. So obviously, as always, you can email them over to the committee and officers. Can members not speaking turn their cameras off? Right, Councillor Fulham has indicated he'd like to speak, so go on.
Hi, Chair.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes,
I did email you and Mrs. I always forget Melania's surname.
Hale.
Hale. Mrs. Hale in advance of the meeting, but granted it was any briefing in advance of the meeting. And it's more of a comment than a question because it's obviously not a council asset, but I was pleased to see the application for the Hardshaw Centre. And where we stand now in with the effect of coronavirus on retail is another matter, but I was really pleased to see that before the pandemic became before we arrived in a public health emergency, that an application went in to bring quite a prominent side of the Hardshaw Centre back into visual use. Obviously, we don't know who the end occupant will be, but I get really frustrated with these poorly designed buildings from the past where it's just constant brickwork. And it's really poor amenity, it's really poor design, and we've got to live with that from previous generations' decisions. And to put some glass frontage back into those spaces, or into those spaces that lacked them in the first place, I think is really welcome, and it should make the town centre feel, St Helens town centre feel a lot more people friendly. But I think we just need to wait and see who the end user may be. And even if the officers have got lots of information, I'm afraid it might not be up to date because of the situation the economy and in particular retail finds itself in. But if there is information and we're in a position to share it, I would be keen to hear it.
I shall pass over to Melanie, but I suspect that a fishing expedition of who might be going in there isn't probably in an officer's remit to do in a planning meeting. So it might be a quick yes or no, but I'll pass over to Melanie to answer that anyway.
Thanks, Chair. I don't have any information, unfortunately. What I would say is that it was to change the use of the Argos unit to a number of specific things. It was to change it from a shop to offices, coffee shop, a laundrette, some toilet facilities. So the fact that it's a laundrette and a coffee shop would potentially indicate they're quite specific things to in a mixed use, so that you would suspect that prior to the current situation they're in, there was probably something in the pipeline, but it's something we can probably look into for you to see if we can find anything out.
Thank you. So Councillor Preston has indicated she'd like to speak, so I'll just wait for the screen to go live and then pass over.
Thanks, Chair. I think it was Mr. Parkinson who said that Amazon, I'm sorry to go back to this item, but I've just realised I may have a declaration of interest because I'm on the board at Teardrops, and I think it was Mr. Parkinson or somebody reading out his things. I've got an interest in it because I'm a volunteer in Teardrops, so I'm not sure whether I need to show declaration of interest. So just advice, please, Chair.
I think for transparency reasons you've done it now, which is far too late because you voted anyway, but I respect where you're coming from with it. So I think based on the fact that you flagged that up in this public forum and there's nothing else we can do anyway, and the fact that your vote wasn't material, so if you didn't vote it wouldn't have changed the outcome. I think at that point we'll draw a line under it there, and you're probably best to speak to the legal officers after the meeting, I think.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So at that point, it brings us to the last item on the agenda. I think everybody who has indicated has spoken. I will do that awkward silence while we just wait to see if anybody needs to. Again, you can email any of us between now and the next committee. The only thing I would say is we're blazing a trail here doing new things, and it's gone reasonably, touch wood, well, I think. So thank you for your participation. From the perspective as a chair, I can't wait to go back to normal meetings because it's much easier to do. But this is the new normal, I think, so we better bear with it for now. So thank you very much for your attendance this evening. Thanks for your contribution.
Can I just come in a moment?
It doesn't usually stop you, so go on anyway.
Would it be possible, before we all turn off, that I had a word with Councillor Bowden about recycling?
No, not in a planning meeting, but I think you can do it.
No, after the meeting, before we turn the screens off.
Well, that's fine. I'll leave that for you two to sort out in your own time. Obviously, colleagues after the meeting, do whatever you want in your own time. But thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's participation. And that concludes this evening's meeting. So stay safe and safe journeys home if you're not already at home. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.